Okay, we'll get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Priya. Thank you for joining us today. I am delighted to present to you our guest speaker for today, Eric Leung from Hong Kong. And it's pretty late for him, so very grateful that he's up and willing to share the knowledge with us today. For those of you who may not be familiar with RegDesk, we are a RIM platform. We're the only RIM platform with integrated regulatory intelligence and AI-powered automated workflows for you to perform assessments, whether that's change assessments or assessments regarding updates to regulations, standards management, and preparing your international submissions in a much smarter, automated way by utilizing auto-population via AI. If you have any questions or want to learn more about RegDesk or want to see a demo or try it out, you can reach out to me separately. And before we get started with our discussion this morning, I'd like to turn our attention to our attendees. Thank you once again for joining us. At the end of this meeting, we will hold a brief Q&A. We encourage your participation as always. Please refer to the chat button on your screen. It's at the bottom of your screen. In the interest of time, please submit your questions throughout the course of our talk, and we'll do our best to address as many of your questions as possible. In case we run out of time, not an issue, you can email us your questions and we'll try to address them via email. And I always say this, we'd love to get your feedback on today's webinar and also ideas you may have for future webinar topics as well. Once again, I'm very excited to introduce you to Eric Leung, who is the founder and managing partner of a leading regulatory consulting company based in Hong Kong. Eric has over 25 years of experience in the medical device industry. His firm helps clients achieve regulatory compliance, quality assurance, and market access. Previously, Eric was a general manager at UL, overseeing the medical device, the regulatory consulting arm of that business, and working with high-tech and appliance divisions in Asia Pacific and Greater China. He also has held leadership roles at 3M, now Solventum, Schwartz Pharma, Bristol Myers Squibb, and Boehringer. Welcome, Eric. Thank you for being here with us and imparting some of this knowledge. There are a lot of changes that have been happening in Hong Kong. We've never covered Hong Kong in the past because then there was hardly any regulatory requirements, any changes. Nothing was really happening in Hong Kong. It was one of those countries that everybody thought had the abbreviated pathway. You can just bring your products to market. But obviously, that's not the case anymore. We've been observing and through our Reg Intel, been capturing a lot of activity with the health agency in Hong Kong. And we thought it's important for us to do a webinar dedicating this time to addressing questions and getting everyone ready and prepared of how they need to navigate and traverse the market for Hong Kong.
Okay, thanks a lot. It's my pleasure to be here tonight and share what I have, for the most updated information for Hong Kong market.
Starting off with, Eric, just curious, when did the legislation for medical device registrations go into effect? Were medical device even regulated before this?
This is actually a very interesting question. I mean, Hong Kong have been setting up, the office for the medical device for more than 20 years. Date back to adopting the EU regulation as their major framework. Now they're moving on to be incorporating other country registration and in order to work out something that is feasible and practical for Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a very small place, it does not have lots of local medical device, and recently they only have a couple of innovations driven by the government. They've been trying to inventing medical device and setting up new medical device company. So at the moment the regulation is still voluntary, but there's already some move that particularly driven by the central government from Beijing, which are driving us to hopefully we can have a more coordinated effort on doing a formal regulatory framework similar to what we have right now in China or other countries like US or Europe, that we have a formal regulatory framework. At the moment, I think the major driver is that the Chinese government want to make Hong Kong to be try to incorporate into their system. So there's a concept called Greater Bay Area, which they want to have a regulatory framework that will be not just covering medical device, will be covering also pharmaceutical, herbal medicine, cosmetic. They try to incorporate those things and combine into one. So we'll be probably hearing something very shortly, probably later this year or early next year, that there will be a new government structure overseeing all of that. Yeah, and medical device will be a major part of that, because in the past, those things are not only voluntary. On the other hand, actually, there's some other things that already been going on, is that, for government hospital, when they do purchasing, they will try to prefer some product that being listed in the voluntary system. The major reason behind is that, particularly for high-risk product, because under the system that they can then, right now, the government can actually monitor and do surveillance. This is very important. Nowadays, everybody's looking at surveillance, not just about whether the product is safe or effective at the time they register. They also want to follow up on that and try to see how the product being performed. So that's one of the reasons that the government hospital, particularly when they purchased those very high risk products, primary implants, or those who are concerned about patients' safety, so they will have asked you to be listed before you can get even to a tender or into their purchase procurement list. Yeah. The other area where the voluntary system become important is that even the retail chain, even you have a consumer product like over-the-counter medical device, the retailer also asking the same question, whether your product being leased. In the past, they just look at whether you're FDA approved it, whether you CE approved it, whether you NMPA approved it. No, right now they're no longer looking at that. So basically, this is what the trend, the regulatory trend for the medical device in Hong Kong. So and hopefully we have another webinar, share with you some latest updates once there are more details, more granular stuff coming out of the government.
Yeah, that's pretty good. And interestingly, what you're saying is that before it was voluntary, now it's not, and everyone's ensuring that if they're going to use your product or put it on even as a consumer product in their stores, that they want to know and ensure that it's been registered. And also another point that you mentioned about how Hong Kong is adopting more of the EU model, rather than you would think, because of its vicinity to China, that it would try to see if it will adopt the Chinese standards, but that's not the case.
That's not the case. That's a very interesting point. I think probably some historical background, because majority of the talents or the regulatory people or the healthcare workers working in Hong Kong, I mean, they're being trained up by the British in the past. And we have more people coming from other country at the moment. I mean, maybe in the future, from other country, from other, who working in the medical industry from other country. So they're more familiar with the EU regulatory system. So that's why, for the good started, easy start, I mean, the government adopt I can say it's more international approach, because I think majority of the country around the world, from a regulatory point of view, they more or less they adopt the EU regulatory system. Yeah. So that's, I mean, that's the reason also probably why we start with a system more inclined or steered towards the EU system.
Understood. Can you briefly explain the key guidelines that have been released in the last 6 months to a year? But again, there've been a lot of alerts coming from the Hong Kong agency.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question as well. Yeah, in the past, actually, over the last 20 years, actually, the Hong Kong MDD, the authority overlooking responsible for the medical device, they are not actually very active. But recently, because the push by the government and also the push by the industry, they recently released more guideline or guidance, better say guideline, guidance, and also some recommendation, to the industry. I think the most important one happened within this 6 months is about product changes. They recently published a guideline, and actually this is certain extent mandatory for all those who would be listed product. Although product already listed in the voluntary scheme, they have to follow that. In the past, I think there's no mechanism to track, whether, what after you do a submission, whether you make any changes to the product, which is very common, after you launch it, maybe 10 years ago, when you submit it to the Hong Kong authority, you come with certain, specification, but after almost 10 years, probably those product, specification may not be updated. So right now they mandate all the, listed product, they have to be submitting their changes. Yeah. The first thing that we're looking probably will be their IFU, product IFU, whether they are really modifying any intended use indications, or patient group, and also they also look at, whether, you will be adding any new models. In the past, there's no way to track that, so that's why, the authority is going to mandate, So basically, they will be asking you to submit all the changes, to notify the changes. So there are two main types of changes within the guideline. One is the major changes, the other one is the minor. Yeah, the major changes are basically, as you can imagine, is similar to what being implemented for the EU. If you have a change in legal manufacturer, change in production sites, intended use, or anything that bringing additional risk, or bringing having a new intended use, that are all being regarded as major change. For those, I think that you have to notify the authority, the Hong Kong MDD, within 12 weeks before implementation. That means before you bring in the new products, you have to inform the regulatory authority at least 12 weeks before you import the products. For minor changes, I think they have a much more flexibility, but still you also have to notify that within the 24 weeks. Yeah, these are the major guidelines and must be followed. I think a lot of the manufacturer may not be aware of that. So the regulatory authority this time is very serious about that. They're really looking, monitoring. If people are not, they find out any product that's actually in the market, they find that it's different from what they have on the file, they may have a chance that actually they will stop your registrations, stop your listing. That means that you no longer list in the even it's a voluntary system. That may probably have some detrimental effect, because as I just mentioned, in some retail outlets for OTC products, in government hospital, if you lost your listing, probably you may lose your tender. Yeah, they may stop procuring your products. So that's the major things that the guideline in terms of regulatory guideline that being published within the 6 months, last 6 months. The other two, actually, there's two more technical guidelines. They're mostly on the software and cybersecurity. Yeah, and also AI, which is a very hot topic. I can't give more details at this moment because it may take another webinar, or it may take a daytime to go through all those the new AI requirements and also the cybersecurity and also software. Yeah, but just give you a little bit hints. There are more towards like this time is not the EU. I mean, they're more inclined towards the US FDA approach. So when you look at the guideline, you see a lot of things that they copy from the FDA. Probably FDA is having publishing quite numbers of guidance recently about cybersecurity and also software. Yeah.
Well, that's good news for foreign manufacturers, because if they already have documentation ready, their evidence ready for cybersecurity and AI from having it submitted to the FDA, then they're in pretty good hands in Hong Kong. What would you say, based on all these changes you mentioned, what is the most impactful change that has happened? Is it the change part, the change aspect, the change assessment?
I think probably it's the way they try to interpret the documents. Yeah, they're getting more serious. I think this is probably the final aim is that we is going to establish a mandatory regulatory system. So they try to putting up more details. I think that in the past, I think they just go through, whether you're being registered in the country reference, which is EU, FDA, NMPA, Singapore, South Korea, Japan, Australia, Canada. Just look at, the administrative document. Right now, they go into more details about, your technical stuff. And also the review board also spend more time on looking at the technical and also clinical informations. In the past, it's almost like administrative. I think when they started the authority, reviewing, the regulatory submissions, they look at all the administrative, whether you have the right certificates, yeah, rights documents, But right now, they really look into the details and also particularly on the technical and the clinical part.
And you mentioned there are separate guidelines for software as a medical device, AI, cybersecurity. Is there a separate guideline or legislation for diagnostic devices?
They have a separate guideline, but the details, actually, the content is more or less similar to the medical device. They are not yet as detailed as the FDA. They have really separate, into medical device and IVDs, and like the European Union separated into separate guideline. But they mostly combine into one. So right now it's still very at the early stage, although they copy it, even though we will have to learn about that.
And then moving on to, we understand these changes and that we have to register our devices. There are more guidelines, which is excellent. What about the time for approval? What are we looking at? How long should, for new medical devices that are being brought into Hong Kong, what is the average timeline for approval?
This is actually the most challenging part for Hong Kong listing, If you want to list a product, register a product in Hong Kong, this is the most challenging part because it can be ranged, the time range can be ranged from 6 months, as far as 6 months, up to about 2 years. Yeah. It really depends on to be honest, it depends on your luck because given, they have a very, very high, long queue because everybody expecting, the listing system will be mandatory sometime in the future, maybe 1 or 2 years. Of course, they will give in some grace period. So that's why, there will be long queue, a lot of manufacturer queuing up, so that a very heavy workload at the moment for the Hong Kong MDD, and they don't have a lot of reviewer, Yeah. So that's why some reviewer are getting, a lot of very tough jobs. So that's why if you come to a reviewer, they're having a very heavy workload, probably it may take you about 2 years time to get, because they have a lot of unfinished, project on hand. But if you're lucky that you go to a reviewer that with a lesser workload, and also maybe a more experienced one, probably sometime will have, so probably will be getting you a much faster time. But one thing that apart from that, one thing for sure that if you want to speed up, your registration, the best ways actually is that you get more country of reference. So the country of reference, let me say it again, those are the EU, Canada, FDA, TGA. They recently adopted South Korea, Singapore, and also Japan. So that's why if you have a multiple country of reference, that means your product being approved in those countries. Yeah. So it will expedite, your registration process. Yeah. So that's one of the best way actually for multinational, if they're having registration in multiple countries, that may really help.
Okay. And what about the timelines for change assessment submissions? What are we anticipating there?
That will be much faster, Of course, depends on the types of changes. If you're really changing the intended use, that probably will be like in new products, But in most cases, like, those administrative stuff, like, change your manufacturing site, you're adding a second manufacturing site, or you're adding a new group of patients, adding some new models, or changing, some specifications. modifying your software, your firmware, those are, I mean, mostly take about from 2 months to 6 months. So it won't be that long, 2 to 6 month time, Of course, this based on assumption that you provide the right information.
If you're a class 3 or a high-risk device and bring it to Hong Kong, is the agency requiring its own clinical investigation, or are they open to accepting clinical data from Australia, or maybe you perform studies in the EU or South America even?
At the moment, there's no requirement for local clinical study, and also no requirement for overseas studies. In fact, they're really following, what the EU. So they require you to submit a clinical evaluations report, similar to what manufacturer doing for the EU submissions. So they basically following the EU guideline for the clinical evaluation. So that's why, some American company may find it difficult, because for FDA, you may not have clinical evaluation reports. You may even not having clinical studies too. That's not a problem. I think that you have to create one, So create one similar to the EU. Yeah. And that's the regulatory authority prefer. Yeah. But just clinical study, papers is not enough. They really need a clinical evaluation report based on the EU requirement.
And then EU's been big on post-market surveillance. Is that also something that Hong Kong is adopting, that level of stringency to post-market?
As far as I know, they're still figuring out, how to do it. So they already have some delegated people responsible for this type of activities, So they haven't have a formal structures. I think sometimes we argue with them, because every time when we see, the alerts, from other country, they will come to us and say that, hey, Eric, we have alerts, can you come back to me in depends on the severity of the alerts, maybe in 2 days or 4 days, or maybe in a week time, So they haven't figured out that kind of, although they have a guideline, but they still working out, how to do it. The most tricky thing is that how they do it locally, not just overseas. Overseas, I think they can rely on other authority looking at the database, the vigilant database, and then try to do monitoring. The most challenging part, I think, is that they were figuring out how to do it, within Hong Kong, the territory. Yeah, how they monitors, particularly, as you mentioned, some type 3, class 3 products, implant products, some interventional products, product involving those invasive procedures. They often have some kind of, may not be serious, but a lot of time they have a lot of that kind of complaint or product alert or field service alert, those things, that will be, this is something that, I know that the authority is working on that. At the moment, there's no formal structures on that. They're still doing surveillance on the overseas, vigilance database.
And does Hong Kong have an electronic portal for submissions, or is it paper-based? The authorized representative walks into the office, submits it. What does that look like, the submission process?
Oh, this is the right time to ask that question. Actually, 2 weeks ago, they moved on to an electronic submission system, which is still a very young system. We still see a little bit, I can't say bugs, there's some difficulty in filling up those forms, but they're moving on. That in the past, I think we have to, we submit, not paper copies, but only a few paper copies, like the authorization letter, like, in some cases, you need to print out the essential principle checklist, yeah. But right now, I think you don't have to do that. You have to do it online, using a system that recently, I think, only go live 2 weeks ago. So right now you can do it in an electronic way. But of course, for those who want to do a submitter, you have to register your company first, yeah, and demonstrating you are qualified to be a manufacturer or retailer or LLP, the local representative person. That means the local agency for the foreign manufacturer.
And there are a few questions, so I'd like to move on to the questions. One of the questions is, if a device does not have the CE mark approval and only has US 510(k) clearance, would it still be considered for registration in Hong Kong? I think you said yes.
Definitely, yeah. But the difficult things that you have to create your own essential principle checklist, and also you have to create a clinical evaluation report, which is similar to what we
Yeah,
do,
CE
what
regs.
people do for EU market.
And then the other question's more about the transferability of the registration. Can you transfer your registration? And who would be the registration holder, the distributor, importer, or the legal manufacturer in Hong Kong?
Actually, it's the local representative person, which is the local agent who will be holding the license. It's pretty easy to transfer, as long as, all the three party agree on that. That
Yeah.
means the X agree to the future. I mean, agree
Yeah.
to give it to the future. Yeah, that's pretty easy. I think it takes about 2 to 3 months time. It's just filling up the form, some administrative documents. Yeah, but of course, if the current party does not agree to that, that would be a little bit tricky. I think you have to do it. I mean, similar to some Asian country, you have to start a new registration.
Yes, I mean, that's always the trick. How willing is the party willing to transfer the license? In
Yeah.
case of termination of the legal relationship with the distributor or the
Mhm.
authorized representative for a foreign
Mhm.
manufacturer, does that mean, yeah, you answered that. Does that mean starting the registration over from scratch? And you're saying in Hong Kong it would be, yeah.
Yeah.
Another interesting question, it was based on the observation on regarding what you spoke, that Hong Kong regulators were trained by the British, you said. And the question is, well, then why adopt EUMDR? And they're just curious, why not the British or the UK's?
Um, this is a very political question, so
Yeah.
it's really hard at this point for me to answer that. Um, um, I think probably is that Hong Kong is evolving to be part of China, so probably that's one of the reason.
Mm.
There's some political reason behind that. We'll be moving that, but we still want to be part of the international community. I mean, there's two things they want to achieve at the same time. So
Yeah,
I
which
really can't, I
makes
really
sense.
can't answer that question, uh, um, but probably there's a
Yeah,
lot of things to consider when they're working out that.
makes sense. Does Hong Kong authorities require a GMP license for legal manufacturer?
No, they basically what you require for the legal manufacturer is the 13485 and the country origins, that the country reference that, probably is the country reference may not be the legal manufacturer, where the legal manufacturer locate. Let's say if you're an American company, you don't have registration in US, you have only have EU registration, you can also make use of that. So basically, it's the country of the reference, having some proof, if you're TGA, if you're Japan, like PMDA certifying that you are decent legal manufacturer, decent medical device manufacturer, that would be
And
fine.
the GMP license that would be applicable to that reference country is what you would need.
Yes, correct. But primarily it's the 13485, what they're looking at. If you US, they may be looking at anti-SAP, MedSAP, MedSAP certificates.
And then the question is, and I don't know, well, there's a question about combination products. For combination products, what are the additional special requirements on the drugs? How are combination products handled? And we're running close to time, but if you're able to answer that.
That's actually an interesting one. Let me say it depends whether which one deliver the primary role. If it is actually the drugs that you're assisting a drugs, like inhaler, the drugs is the main products, they're going to be registered so that the inhaler, the device will be, so you have to submit for the pharmaceutical first. And at the same time, you also have, they may ask, the pharma division may ask you to provide medical device certificates, evidence, and they may also ask, the medical device department to do a combined review on that. But that's not very normal. The most common case actually is, will be the drug eluting stent, where the stent is the main product. The drug is only some kind of supportive, In that case, actually, what they're looking at is that drugs must be, in most cases, must have to be approved in Hong Kong. Yeah. Otherwise, they won't allow you to do that. Yeah. So that's why it's still the medical device, the regulatory medical device department who do the review, but they will ask, whether, that drugs, or pharmaceutical, have been registered in Hong Kong. But at least you have to prove that you'll be registered in your home country. Yeah.
Understood. And for our participants, thank you so much for joining. We will request Eric to address one more question if you are able to stay for it, but we understand we're over time and we respect your time as well. I believe this can help the client in case of re-registration because you couldn't transfer the license over. Can then the authorized representative, can you get expedited review because your product's registered and it was more of a transfer issue?
Unfortunately, is based on our experience, is a no. Yeah, actually, they would take it as a new product, and you put in a queue, and so there are no reference to the previous products. Actually, they take it as a new one. Yeah.
Okay, understood. Well, Eric, thank you. This was extremely informative. We appreciate your time. Again, if we didn't address any of your questions, we did address most of them. Please feel free to email me, or if you need help, assistance with registration in Hong Kong or need consultancy, we're happy to connect you directly with Eric and his firm. Thanks again, everyone. Thank you, Eric.
Okay, thank you. Have a nice day.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.